Every radio telescope on Earth went dead at the same moment. Not broken, not jammed, just silent, as if the universe itself had taken a breath and held it. In the deep monitoring station buried under the Swiss Alps, analyst Priya Nair stared at a wall of blank screens and felt her stomach drop. She had worked in this station for 11 years. The screens had never all gone blank at once. She picked up the red handset on her desk. It connected to one place. "This is Alpine Station," she said. "We have a full blackout, all frequencies. Timestamp 03:42 UTC. The voice on the other end was already awake. Admiral Rail Akoi had not slept. He had been sitting in the joint defense bunker beneath Nairobi for 6 hours, watching a cluster of objects cross the outer solar system at a speed no natural body could manage. He had been waiting for exactly this call. "Understood," he said. "Begin protocol extinction. Authorization." Akoi 7 read. Far above the Earth, in the cold black between the moon and the asteroid belt, 1,400 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel. They arrived in perfect formation, a wall of metal and firepower so large that the combined shadow would have covered a continent. Their hulls were dark gray, almost black, marked with the sigil of the Voreth Empire, 4 interlocking circles that represented the 4 home worlds of their civilization, a civilization that had stood for 4,000 years. Fleet Lord Drav Sultan stood at the observation deck of his flagship and looked at the blue planet below him. It was smaller than he expected, fragile-looking. His intelligence division had briefed him thoroughly. Pre-interstellar species, combustion-based propulsion, primitive energy weapons, no unified government capable of coordinated military response. The planet was divided into hundreds of competing nations that spent most of their resources fighting each other. He was not here to fight, he was here to collect. His communications officer broadcast the absorption signal on every frequency. It was a standard message, translated into the dominant languages of the target world based on intercepted transmissions. It said, "Your world is now a territory of the Voreth Empire. All governing bodies are dissolved. Lay down weapons. Resistance will be met with proportional response." Drav did not wait for an answer. He never did. In 31 previous absorptions, the signal had never needed a reply. The target species either surrendered or died in the first hour, and the ones that chose to die never lasted past the second. He gave the order for a single warning shot, one beam aimed at the large ocean on the planet's surface, a demonstration of force, nothing more. The beam hit the water. A column of steam 20 kilometers high rose into the atmosphere. From orbit, it looked almost beautiful. Then his sensor operator said something that Drav had never heard in 4 decades of service. "Fleet Lord, I am reading objects rising from the planet's surface, also from the satellite, also from several points in the debris field beyond the 4th planet." Drav turned slowly. "Ships?" "No, sir." The operator's voice was careful, like someone reading bad news aloud for the first time. "They are too small for ships, they are. I do not have a classification for them. There are approximately 40,000 of them. They are moving fast, very fast." Drav looked at the screen. The objects were rising in perfect arcs, spreading outward, filling the space around his fleet like a net being drawn closed. He noted the geometry. It was precise. It was deliberate. It had clearly been planned long before his fleet arrived. He opened his mouth to give an order. Before he could speak, his science officer cut in. "Fleet Lord, I need you to look at the age of these launch signatures." "What about them?" "These missiles were not launched in response to our arrival." The science officer paused. "The oldest signatures are 18 months old. They have been waiting out here, in the dark, for us." The observation deck was quiet. Drav stared at the screen, at the blue planet below, at the web of 40,000 objects now surrounding his fleet on all sides. He thought about the intelligence briefings. Pre-interstellar, primitive weapons, no coordinated response. He thought about the fact that whoever lived on that planet had known, somehow, 18 months ago, exactly where his fleet would drop out of FTL travel, and had put weapons there to greet it. His daughter, Subcommander Ayla, stepped to his side. She studied the screen in silence for a long moment. "Father," she said quietly, "I do not think the intelligence briefings were accurate." Drav did not answer. He was watching the objects close in, patient and precise, like a trap that had already finished closing and was only now letting itself be seen. Down on the ground, in what was left of a normal night in Lagos, Corporal Bayo Musa looked up at the sky. The stars were moving. Thousands of slow, distant lights, drifting in patterns no star had ever moved in. Some were coming down. Some were going up. And somewhere high above, silent and invisible, the thing that humanity had spent 40 years quietly building was beginning at last to show itself. Bayo had been a soldier for 6 years. He had seen bad things. He gripped his rifle, checked the charge, and waited. The sky above him lit up like a second sunrise. The first missile reached the Voreth fleet, not with a bang but with a pulse. It detonated 40 kilometers from the nearest warship, and for half a second nothing seemed to happen. Then 32 Voreth vessels went dark, not destroyed, not burning, simply offline like machines with their power cut. Their shields vanished. Their engines stopped. They drifted, dead and silent, in a formation that had never once been threatened in 4,000 years of expansion. Drav Sultan gripped his command console. Report. His engineering chief was already pulling data. EMP event, highly focused. It targeted our shield harmonic frequency with near-perfect precision. He looked up. Fleet Lord, our shield harmonic is classified. It has never been transmitted externally. Then how? The engineering chief had no answer. The answer was sitting in a desk drawer in the Joint Defense Archive in Nairobi, a research document dated 2141, written by scientists who had spent 2 decades analyzing Voreth routine communications, not military signals, cargo manifests, administrative frequencies, the background noise of an empire that never once considered that something on a primitive world might be smart enough to decode it. They had found the harmonic pattern buried in a shield calibration routine the Voreth broadcast to their own repair stations. They had cracked it in 3 months and told no one outside the Defense Command. Then they waited. Admiral Okoye watched the readout from Nairobi. 32 ships down in the first wave. "Lunar battery," he said, "you are clear to fire." On the dark side of the moon, in tunnels drilled quietly over 22 years under the cover of a mining operation, 40 rail gun batteries opened up simultaneously. They fired physical projectiles, dense metal rods, each one the size of a car, moving at 12 kilometers per second. No beam, no energy signature, just metal moving very fast in very large numbers. Voreth point defense systems were built to stop energy weapons. Lasers, plasma bursts, particle beams. They were excellent at it. They were not built for this. The targeting systems kept trying to lock on and kept losing the track because the rods reflected almost nothing and moved in ways that looked, to Voreth sensors, more like debris than ordnance. 14 more warships were hit. 3 broke apart. The others vented atmosphere and tumbled. Aboard the Voreth cruiser Burning Promise, a damage control crew was still fighting fires when the boarding breach alarm started screaming. Something had attached to the hull from outside and was cutting through. The security team moved to intercept, weapons ready. What came through the breach was not what they expected. Humans in hard vacuum suits, moving fast, carrying weapons smaller than Voreth standard but firing rounds that punch through light armor at close range. 12 of them. The security team numbered 40. The humans spread out into the corridors and did not fight in straight lines. They moved through maintenance shafts and ventilation tunnels too small for Voreth soldiers in full armor, attacking from directions that made no sense unless the attackers had memorized the ship's layout. They had. The schematics came from a Voreth probe that had passed through the outer system 60 years ago, quietly intercepted, boarded, copied, and returned to its original trajectory with no visible sign of tampering. The feed from the burning promise cut out 11 minutes after the breach. Drav ordered a full retreat. His navigation officer told him the jump corridors were blocked, not by ships, by a field of objects too small to track individually, distributed through the exact paths his fleet would use for FTL. The field had been there for weeks. Ayla stood at the tactical display and traced the geometry of the blockade with one finger. Then the EMP paths, then the lunar firing lines. This was designed around us, she said. Not a generic invasion force, us, our specific fleet doctrine, our standard formation spacing, our point defense weaknesses. She turned to her father. They have been studying us specifically for a long time. Drav said nothing. The intelligence briefings said these people had no interstellar travel. They do not, Drav said. No, Ayla looked at the planet below. But they did not need to travel to study us. They only needed to listen, and they have clearly been listening for a very long time. A signal came through. Human origin, translated accurately into Voreth standard, which meant the humans had also cracked the Voreth communication protocol probably years ago. The voice was calm, the message was short. You have lost 87 ships in 30 minutes. You cannot jump. You cannot retreat. I am offering you terms. This offer will not improve with time. Drav cut the signal. He stared at the screen. His fleet, which had never once failed to absorb a target world, was trapped in orbit, bleeding ships to a species classified as low priority and pre-contact. He looked at the blue planet for a long time. Then he said quietly to no one, "What are they?" Below, Corporal Bayo Musa dragged a wounded soldier behind a collapsed wall, pressed a field bandage against a burning shoulder wound, and kept his eyes on the alien landing pod that had just hit the ground 3 streets away. He had an answer to that question, but nobody up there had thought to ask him yet. The Voreth ground troops landed in Lagos at dawn. They came in 40 drop pods, hitting the streets in a ring formation designed to secure a perimeter and push inward. It was a textbook Voreth insertion, fast, overwhelming, designed to capture a population center and use the civilians inside as leverage. It had worked on 19 worlds. The pods hit the ground, the ramps dropped, and then something strange happened. Nothing fired at them. The streets were empty. The buildings were dark. Every civilian was gone, not panicked, not running, gone, as if they had simply evaporated. The Voreth squad leaders moved their units forward through empty streets and silent buildings, and the silence itself felt wrong. There was no sound except their own boots and the distant rumble of orbital fire high above. Sergeant Bayo Musa was 3 floors above ground level, prone on the floor of a gutted apartment, watching the lead Voreth unit pass below through the scope of his rifle. He counted 12 soldiers, heavy armor, unfamiliar weapons, moving in a standard search and clear pattern that any human soldier could have identified from a training manual. Humanity had studied that pattern for 40 years too. He waited until the unit moved into the intersection, then clicked twice on his radio. The first explosion came from the sewer line beneath the intersection. Not large, just enough to crack the pavement and destroy the road surface. The Voreth soldiers scattered. 3 fell into the gap. The other 9 raised their weapons and looked for the source. They looked up. They looked at the buildings on either side. They did not look at the delivery truck parked at the far end of the street because it looked like a delivery truck, and there was nothing threatening about a delivery truck. The truck was full of electromagnetic disruptors built from modified industrial equipment, designed specifically to disable Voreth armor suit electronics at close range. Dr. Nadia Voss had designed them in a university basement in Cape Town 6 years ago on a budget that would not have covered the fuel costs for one Voreth patrol craft. The disruptors fired. 9 suits of Voreth armor locked up simultaneously. The soldiers inside were unhurt but immobile, standing frozen in the street like statues. Bayo's unit came down and collected them. That was the first hour of the ground war in Lagos. It played out differently in every city the Voreth touched, because every city had been prepared differently, by different people, using different methods, all coordinated toward the same outcome. In Karachi, the underground fiber network had been quietly converted into a communications grid that was invisible to Voreth scanning frequencies. In Sao Paulo, the subway tunnels had been mapped and preloaded with supplies and weapons. In Osaka, robotics engineers had built autonomous decoys that looked like human soldiers on thermal imaging. The Voreth had prepared for a world that fought back in panic. Instead, they found a world that had been quietly preparing for them while going about its daily life. Ayla Sultan watched the ground reports come in from orbit. Each one was the same story in a different city. A Voreth unit lands. The humans are already gone. The humans already know the Voreth formation doctrine. The humans have already built something specifically to counter it. She pulled up the historical database on human conflicts. Not interstellar history. She already knew that was blank. Earth history. Thousands of years of it, available in intercepted broadcasts and digital archives that the Voreth Intelligence Service had collected and never fully analyzed because why would you spend time analyzing the internal warfare of a primitive world? She read for 40 minutes, then she stopped reading and sat very still. These people had been at war with each other constantly for their entire recorded history. Every generation, every continent. They had fought with rocks and they had fought with nuclear weapons and they had fought with everything in between. Each war had produced new tactics, new technologies, new countermeasures, and then new countermeasures to those countermeasures. They had refined the art of killing and surviving across 10,000 years, with a consistency and creativity that no other species in the Voreth Empire's records had come close to matching. And at some point, she could identify the exact moment in the 21st century when they had first detected Voreth signals. They had turned all of that accumulated knowledge outward, not toward each other, toward the dark. She went to her father's command deck. He was staring at a damage report. 612 ships lost or disabled. The number had been rising steadily for 3 hours. "I have been reading their history," she said. "And they have been fighting wars for 10,000 years. They are very good at it." She paused. "But that is not the important part." Drav looked at her. "The important part," Ayla said, "is that every war they ever fought they eventually stopped. They made agreements. They found ways to stop. And then they used what they had learned to prepare for the next one." She looked at the planet below. They always knew there would be a next one. They just did not always know who it would be with. Drav was quiet for a moment. "Are you saying we were the next one?" "I am saying," Ayla replied carefully, "that from the moment they picked up our signals, we were the only one they were preparing for." Above the clouds, the battle continued. Below them, in the streets of 3 continents, Voreth ground units were being taken apart piece by piece by a species that had spent its entire existence learning how to fight in places it knew, and its enemies did not. Bayo Musa zipped a restraint around the wrist of a frozen Voreth soldier and moved to the next street. He had more streets to clear before the sector was done. Drav Sultan made a decision that he would spend the rest of his life regretting. With the jump corridors blocked, his assault units failing on the ground, and nearly a third of his fleet dark, he did something that no fleet lord in Voreth history had ever done to a target world during an absorption. He ordered the fleet to fire on civilian population centers. Not to destroy, to threaten, to force a surrender. In his 40 years of service, he had seen the tactic work twice before on other worlds, breaking the Resistance's will within hours. He told himself it was strategy. He did not think about what it actually was. The first orbital strike hit a coastal region outside Mumbai. The second hit a plain in northern Argentina. Both strikes were aimed at low population zones with enough visible destruction to send a clear message. Drav watched the feeds and waited for the human command structure to break. What he received instead, 40 seconds later, was a communication from Admiral Akoy. The tone had not changed. The voice was still calm. "You have now committed an act that changes the terms of this engagement," Akoy said. "I want you to understand what that means. It means we stop holding back." Drav cut the channel. He told himself it was a bluff. It was not a bluff. Aboard Orbital Station Ring 7, Dr. Nadia Voss authorized the release of a weapons package that had been locked behind a 4-person command code for 6 years. It was called the Hollow Point Program. 12 platforms distributed across the orbital shell, each one carrying a clustered antimatter payload, each one designed after 6 years of research into captured Voreth probe materials. The payloads were shaped specifically to punch through the layered hull architecture of Voreth capital ships, bypassing the structural reinforcement zones that standard weapons could not penetrate. Nadia had built it. She had hoped she would never have to use it. She used it. 12 platforms fired simultaneously. The Voreth fleet had no defense against it because it had never needed one. Nothing in their 31 previous campaigns had ever produced a weapon capable of threatening capital-class hull armor. The idea that a pre-interstellar civilization could have reverse-engineered their own materials from a single probe was, by any reasonable measure, absurd. Humanity was not operating by reasonable measures. 8 Voreth capital ships were destroyed in the first salvo, 3 more in the second. The Endless Dominion, Drav's flagship, took a direct hit to its drive section. The ship did not explode, it broke. The forward section separated from the engineering hull and both pieces began to drift. Emergency bulkheads sealed. Life support held. Drav Soltan, still alive, found himself in a dead ship surrounded by dead consoles and the sound of cooling metal. He had an escape pod. He did not use it yet. He sat in the dark and listened to the battle reports coming in on the emergency channel. His fleet was in full collapse. Ships were surrendering in groups. The blocking field in the jump corridors was tightening, not loosening. The humans were adjusting it in real time from somewhere, herding the remaining functional ships into a smaller and smaller area of space. The ground campaign was over. The last Voreth units had been neutralized or captured. No Voreth soldier had reached a single command installation. No hostage had been taken. Every ambush had failed. The planet below looked exactly as it had 3 hours ago, blue and white and impossibly calm. Ayla Soltan's escape pod had already launched from the secondary hull. She was alive. She opened a channel to the human command frequency, and this time she spoke first. "This is Subcommander Ayla Soltan. I am assuming command of remaining Voreth forces. I am ordering a full stand-down. I am requesting formal terms of surrender." There was a pause on the other end of the channel. Then Akoy's voice. "Confirmed. Hold your position. Do not fire. We will come to you." What neither of them said, but both of them knew, was that the battle had cost both sides enormously. In the civilian zones struck before the Hollow Point response, the dead numbered in the millions. The Earth below was not unscathed. Several regions were burning. Emergency networks were overwhelmed. The victory was real, but it was not clean, and the weight of it was already settling on everyone who had been part of it. Bayo Musa sat on a piece of broken concrete in what used to be a market street and looked at the sky. The alien lights up there were going dark one by one. He had a cut on his face that needed stitches and 2 soldiers in his unit who were not going home. He did not feel victorious. He felt tired and sad and grateful to be breathing. An alien soldier, Voreth, in deactivated armor, was sitting 10 meters away with its hands bound, watching him. It had been watching him for several minutes. Eventually it made a sound, not a word but something questioning in its tone. Bayo looked at it. He did not know its language. He reached into his pack, pulled out a sealed ration bar, and slid it across the concrete toward the alien. The alien looked at the ration bar for a long moment. Then it picked it up. Bayo leaned back against the rubble and looked up at the sky where the last few alien ships were still drifting, and thought about nothing in particular. 3 days after the battle, the wreckage above Earth was still visible from the ground. On clear nights you could see it with the naked eye, a broken ring of drifting metal that caught the sunlight and glittered like a second set of stars. Children in the southern hemisphere pointed at it. Old people sat on their rooftops and watched it move slowly across the sky and thought about what it meant. It meant the universe was not empty. It meant something out there had looked at Earth and decided it was small enough to take. And it meant that Earth had, against every reasonable expectation, proven that wrong. In the Joint Defense Bunker in Nairobi, a team of linguists, historians, and communication specialists were working in shifts alongside Subcommander Ayla Soltan, building a detailed map of the Vorath Empire. Ayla cooperated completely. She handed over star charts, fleet registries, diplomatic records, and something even more valuable: the full intelligence file the Vorath had compiled on every civilization they had ever absorbed, were currently monitoring, or had marked as future targets. There were 11 names on the future target list, 11 other worlds scattered across 400 light-years that the Vorath Empire had quietly identified as acquisition candidates. Some of them were pre-contact, as Earth had appeared to be. Some were early interstellar. None of them knew the Vorath were coming. Akoy read the list carefully. Then he handed it to his communications team with a single instruction: find a way to reach them. The messages took months to compose. They were translated into 17 different potential language structures based on intercepted signals. Each message contained the same core information: what had happened at Earth, what the Vorath were, where their fleet positions were known to be, and an offer. Not a demand. Not an alliance with conditions attached, just an offer. We know what is coming. We survived it. If you want to know how, we will tell you. The messages were sent. Nobody knew if they would arrive in time. Nobody knew if the species that received them would even understand them. But the messages went out anyway, because doing nothing was not an option that sat well with the people doing the sending. The second message went in a different direction entirely. It was a tight beam transmission aimed directly at the Vorath homeworld. It contained 3 things. The first was the complete unedited battle footage from every sensor platform that had recorded the engagement, every destroyed ship, every failed ground assault, every moment where a 4,000-year empire ran into a wall it had not known was there. The second was a list of the dead, human dead, millions of names compiled from the struck civilian regions, arranged in alphabetical order by language. The third was a set of coordinates, Earth's location, precisely mapped. No demands, no threats, no terms, just this is what happened. These are the people you killed. Here is where we are. Come back if you choose to. We will be here. The Vorath homeworld did not respond, but the transmission was also received, as intended, by every civilization within range that had the equipment to pick it up. And there were many. On a world 40 light-years away, in a civilization that had been quietly observing the electromagnetic activity of the inner galaxy for 200 years, a senior analyst sat in front of a receiving station and watched the battle footage 3 times in full. She did not speak for a long while afterward. They did all of that, she said finally to the colleague beside her, before they could even leave their own solar system. Yes, her colleague said. They used their own nuclear weapons as tools. They boarded Vorath cruisers with 12 soldiers and 1. They had a trap waiting for a fleet that hadn't been invented yet when the trap was set. Yes. She was quiet again, Pull every file we have on them, everything. We need to reconsider our entire assessment." She paused. "We also need to consider whether we want to respond to that message." "And what do you think?" She looked at the battle footage one more time. At the image of a fleet of 1,400 warships, the pride of a 4,000-year empire, sitting dead in orbit around a pale blue world that had simply refused to lose. "I think," she said carefully, "that when a species like that extends an offer of friendship, you do not ignore it." Back on Earth, Nadia Voss submitted her formal resignation from the Hollow Point weapons program the same week. She walked out of the Ring 7 station for the last time, rode a shuttle down to the surface, and drove to a university in Cape Town, where a former colleague was running a research group on captured Voreth propulsion systems. She knocked on the lab door. Her colleague opened it. He had not seen her in 6 years. "I'm done building things that kill," she said. "I want to build something that moves." He stepped back and let her in. 6 months after the battle, the first response came. It arrived as a tight beam signal from a direction that matched none of the 11 worlds on Ayla's list. It came from somewhere else entirely. A civilization that had not been on the Voreth's radar. A species that had apparently been listening to human radio transmissions for 80 years and had chosen, until now, to say nothing. The message was short. It said, "We received your broadcast. We have also encountered the Voreth. We did not survive as well as you did. We would like to talk." Akoy read the decrypted message 3 times. Then he called Ayla into the briefing room and put it on the screen in front of her. She read it, then she said, "There are others." "Yes," Akoy said. "Others who survived the Voreth and did not have what you had." "It seems so." Ayla was quiet for a moment. "What will you do?" Akoy leaned back in his chair. Outside the window, the orbital debris field was mostly cleared now, the larger pieces salvaged, the smaller ones tracked and scheduled for collection. The sky above Nairobi was close to normal again, which was both a relief and a kind of sadness, as if the sky going normal meant people might start to forget how close it had been. "We are going to go meet them," he said. The ship had been under construction for 11 years before the battle, in a facility on the lunar far side that was listed in public records as an industrial research station. It was built partly from human materials, partly from components reverse-engineered from the Voreth probe that had been quietly borrowed and returned decades ago. After the battle, it had been refitted with Voreth FTL drive components, the real ones, not the copies, salvaged from disabled ships. It was not a warship. It had weapons, because going into the unknown without weapons would have been foolish, and Earth had not survived by being foolish. But it was not designed around its weapons. It was designed around its crew of 600, its cargo holds full of supplies and materials, its communication arrays, and its medical bays. Bayo Musa was part of the crew. Not as a soldier, as a member of the First Contact Liaison Team, a unit that did not exist 6 months ago and had been assembled from soldiers, diplomats, linguists, engineers, and 2 doctors who had specifically requested reassignment. He had been asked if he wanted to volunteer. He had said yes before the officer finished the sentence. He was standing on the observation deck when the ship left lunar orbit. He watched the moon fall behind, and then the Earth get smaller, a blue circle getting paler and more distant until it looked the way it had always looked from space, fragile and beautiful and very small against everything else. He thought about the soldier in deactivated armor sitting across from him on that broken concrete, the one he had handed a ration bar to. He did not know what had happened to that individual, whether it had been repatriated, whether it had chosen to stay, whether it had made it home. He thought about it anyway. Ayla Sultan was also aboard, not as a prisoner or a detainee, as a formal diplomatic liaison, the first Voreth to hold that role with any non-Voreth species. She had her own cabin. She ate in the crew mess. She was learning English, which she claimed was unnecessarily complicated, and Bayo was teaching her, which she claimed was not helping. On the third day out, she found him on the observation deck and stood beside him without speaking for a long time. "Your people are strange," she said eventually. "Most people say that," Bayo agreed. "You fought us, you won, and then you sent a message to other worlds telling them how to fight you if they had to. You gave away your own tactics." "We gave them the option to defend themselves," Bayo said. "There is a difference." Ayla considered that. In Voreth thinking, that is a very strange way to build power. "We are not building power," Bayo said. "We are building neighbors." She looked at him for a moment and then looked back out at the stars. "I'm not sure the galaxy is ready for you," she said. "The galaxy had better get ready," Bayo said, "because we are not stopping." The ship moved forward into the dark. Behind it, Earth continued its orbit, rebuilding, mourning, arguing, remembering. 600 people moved outward toward a voice that had said, "We survived too. We would like to talk," carrying with them every mistake their species had ever made and every lesson those mistakes had produced. They had not asked the galaxy's permission. The Voreth Empire had stood for 4,000 years. It had taken 31 worlds. It had looked at the soft blue planet in the quiet solar system and seen something small and easy. It had been wrong about what it was. It had fired one shot. It had not fired a second. And somewhere in the dark between stars, 600 humans were already on their way to make sure the next chapter was not written by anyone else.